Good evening. To our presentation. Thank you for coming by. We very much appreciate it. My name is Dave Johnson. For about the past 8 years, I was the Hamden municipal historian. And about 4 months ago, I passed the torch to our speaker, Paul Soberstreet. Paul is a lifelong member of Hamden, minus 1 year. He moved here when he was a year old. He has a Bachelor of Science degree from Yale University, and for many years had a career in electronic and software engineering. He's a man of many talents. He is a church organist. He at St. Rita's Church, among other places in Hamden. He's also an exercise instructor, as well as a regular visitor to our history room, which is upstairs in the old school building on the top floor. That's where I met him. I've been very fortunate to know Paul. Paul is an enthusiastic contributor to in fact, he's the editor of our website, Hamden Historical Society.org or .com. And he has done some extensive research on the history of Hamden street names, which is sort of the theme of what's going to happen tonight. So I'm delighted to present Paul Soberstreet, and I know you're going to be well entertained because we had a sneak preview of this about 3 weeks ago at our Journey meeting, which is another history-related concern that we all belong to. Paul, take it away.
Okay, well, thanks, Dave. I don't know. Let's see if maybe you hear me a little better with this. Does this help? This help hear me? Feedback? Too much?
No, it's just overmodulated, that's all.
Back maybe. No, and I think I better sit down. So can everybody see the screen pretty easily? Because this is not a typical PowerPoint thing with pretty pictures and a few words. There's a lot of detail, everything in this short here. So good. I think everybody can get a good view of it. All right, but I probably better sit down. Me too. Okay. So yeah, wow, what I'm really happy all these people here today. Wow. Okay. And I am putting this on Zoom. I do see actually 3 other people are here. Let's see. I don't know if I can. Yeah, some other people are here. Okay. So, anybody recognize this picture here? Yeah. The bank section goes right there. So I'm pointing was originally Hamden Bank and Trust. And really interesting, you can see right on this corner here, it's still there at the same name, French Italian liquor store, but there was still building the stores next to it. So probably around 1930s. Okay, so I have to get into the presentation. At the start of presentations or documents, in recent years, it's become common practice to make a land acknowledgement to recognize the indigenous people who originally lived in the land that we now occupy. And if we're talking about streets, that's especially appropriate because we really are indebted to the Quinnipiac tribe for establishing some of the first paths that influence the way our streets are laid out today. Around oh, internet connection unstable. Oh well. Won't affect us here. Okay. Around 1930, a group called Colonial Dames of America made this map of what they thought the indigenous people in what we now call Connecticut, how they lived just before the English people arrived. And zooming in on another scan I have with more detail on the Quinnipiac's land here. And this is really quite something. You can see here this shoreline path is more or less like Route 1 today. And see the Quinnipiac River. And on the west side of it is pretty much now what State Street is. You see, was laid out on an Indian original one of their paths there. This is probably we got Quinnipiac Avenue in North Haven and Middletown Avenue. You see all those routes really follow paths that were traveled many centuries before by the indigenous people. Now, moving on to the first. Well, actually, before that, I just found this recently. This picture. This was in a book for the first centennial of Connecticut in 1635 to 1935, and this is what they imagined New Haven looked like in 1639. See the original 9 squares bounding by George Street, State Street, Grove Street, and York Street, with that wooden palisade all around it, and right near the harbor. So how close the harbor was to the 9 squares at the time. And you can see leading off the State Street here, you can see this path here, a little bridge across the Mill River there, the State Street into Hamden. And off the end of Elm Street here, you can see Whaley Avenue to Westville, West Rock there. Dixwell Avenue going in what would be Hamden here. That's East Rock. And you notice way off in the corner, just a little bit of Sleeping Giant there. It's his head and chest of Sleeping Giant. So moving on to the first real map of, this was still the colony of Connecticut before we were United States. We'll zoom in some of this thing for the Right Honorable Earl of Dover and Secretary of State for the Southern Department, the colony of Connecticut in North America. And you can see here the original boundaries of the town of New Haven was pretty much the same as the Quinnipiac land here. And you can see here too, the first road that in what's now Hamden, you can see State Street again. Notice this bend in the Quinnipiac River, that State Street right by it there, that's just where it is today. And North Haven, it crosses over the rest of Route 5 in North Haven there. You can see Sleeping Giant Hills shown there. And I suppose that's supposed to be Yale there, that little it's college building there. And now the first map that actually, first good map, I'll say, that shows the boundaries of the town of Hamden, called State map made in 1811. Hamden became a town separated from New Haven in 1786. And it's good we can really zoom in well far on this and look at Hamden on this. And you can see here coming out Dixwell Avenue, they don't show it all the course of Dixwell, they show it like leading into Shepherd Avenue and Sherman Avenue to come out here. You see these 2 churches? That was still the location of Mount Carmel Congregational. And that was the original location of Grace Episcopal Church before it moved to Centerville. And East Plains, that was the original location of Whitneyville Congregation. Whitneyville Congregational was there. Now, if you look really closely on, this is the Mill River, it's wiggly line all through most of Hamden there. All those little dots signify mills, places where they dammed the river to provide water power. At this time, the only places that would, and its center of population would grow up around a place where there was a mill. It was needed for providing power to grind grain, sawmill, to cut timber for houses. So essential and locations for where the people gathered. We were really fortunate to have Mill River, so many places all along it that little villages grew up around them. And let's move on to the next map here. Okay, this was in 1848, yes, because this shows next significant development. This dark line here, anybody guess what that is there? Let's zoom in real close. See, they look Farmington Canal. That enables more traffic to go up there. And this other dark line here, the railroad, already existed from New York to New Haven, and the railroad from New Haven to Hartford. Still along the same tracks that trains go on today. And trains, of course, they're just steam-powered coal trains. We're able to bring coal to all locations along their routes, and so they have factories powered by steam engines. Enable more development along the railroad lines. Oh, and on the canal there too, it's, I mean, already heard this past weekend, they opened up the last stretch of the canal line, and that's something, I took a walk through that tunnel under Whitney Avenue. That's really something, it's a nice thing to visit. And in fact, yes, let's look and it has a little inset map here of the plan of New Haven. And you can see the canal shown there. Right where it's that, if you can see that word canal, that's like the stretch that just opened by the Park of the Arts there. And that little tunnel right under between Whitney and Temple there. And it's, I think, the first map to show the street names in New Haven. You can see the streets by the ever named. I mean, by the way, if any questions along the way, anything really, I'll hopefully have time for questions at the end, but if, anything jumps out at you, we'll right for it. I'll be asking you some questions too, so you all stay awake. Get a little, yeah. Okay. So let's move on to the other. This is the first map of just the New Haven County. So by this time, there were more streets, more people living, more development that couldn't show everything you needed on a map of the whole state. You had to have a separate map for each county. And we have a zoomed in section on Hamden here. Hamden, unfortunately, was right where the four sheets of the big map came together. There's a big hole in the middle of it, unfortunately, but we can still see some more on this scan here. So what, obviously not all the streets that exist today are on this map, obviously. But what other fundamental difference in what is shown on this map compared to if you looked at a street map, either a big paper street map today, or if you zoomed in on Google Maps? What's different about this map and from what we're being shown on a modern map? Anybody have any ideas? Oh, you answered David already. Those are sort of presentations ready. Any ideas what's fundamentally different? No, yeah, no highways, of course. Yeah.
Where's this one from?
What's that? Oh, yeah, this is 1852. The Whiteford map, 1852. You might think of a hit song by the group U2, where the streets have no name.
Oh,
Right, the streets aren't named. The streets didn't need names. Just the people who lived on them know where they were. There was no reason for people in New Haven to go out and visit the farmers, most of the farmers. There's no reason for, people just navigated by what was in their head. Yeah, but it does show all the people that lived there. So if you could use this map if you had to find somebody. I mean, nobody got Amazon deliveries. Nobody, right? Yeah, there's no post mail. There was mail. You had to pick up your mail at the post office. So they need addresses. They didn't have utility bills, right? So nobody needed addresses.
hey, Paul, what
Yes.
about the mile markers?
The mile markers. What about the mile markers?
Well, would they have used those as?
Yeah, they might. It's interesting that they don't show the mile markers on this. I never thought about that. It might have been a useful, because that was another interest of mine. The mile markers.
Seldom Farm,
What's that?
it sold the chunk out of Lower,
How did I identify?
the chunk was taken off by the West Rock,
Or by New Haven?
Yeah.
I mean, the trans.
Oh, yeah, this, yeah, no, I wasn't gonna get into that, yeah, but there have been some changes in the town boundaries of Hamden since it was established. Now, actually, I'll get to another one of those changes. There is like a jigsaw puzzle piece of New Haven just to Hamden here. It's not shown on this map, but anyway, let's move on to the next here. Oh, actually, before the map, maps are interesting, but let's get to see what the streets actually look like. And this might be the first, maybe Dave knows any better than me. This might be the first image of any place in Hamden. This painting was made in 1827, I think, or maybe around, maybe a little earlier than that map. Whitneyville. This is the Whitney Armory. And actually, going back to the map for a moment here, something to look at is where what is now Whitney Avenue came out of New Haven. You look real close here. It's the Whitney's Armory, you left the H out of Whitney. You could go straight across, there wasn't the big lake there, it was just a small dam for power for the armory. And it wasn't the reservoir of Lake Whitney at the time, so you could go straight across from Whitney Avenue to what's now Hartford Turnpike. And you can see that on that painting. Here's Whitney Avenue coming out of New Haven, and there's a covered bridge that the other end of it would go into Hartford Turnpike. And now we have a replica of that bridge was made near the Eli Whitney Museum. And across of here was not a smaller bridge at the time here to go into East Rock. And you can see it was a much more bustling factory town at the time there. It was, bunches of factory building, all houses for the workers there. So it's interesting to see how different Whitneyville, just the corner of Armory and Whitney, how different that was at the time.
So Paul,
Yes.
are the buildings that are there for kinetic preservation and the barn? Are those
Yeah,
two?
I think this is the barn. It doesn't look exactly the
Oh.
same. And I don't know those,
Oh, I thought
maybe,
they're closer.
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know the Preservation Connecticut building, I don't know, would have been. Looks to be very similar design to all these other houses here, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, there's another image later on that will look at. And this is just my idea of what most of those roads you saw on the map before, what they looked like. This is actually Old Sturbridge Village. I took this picture. But this is your typical, don't think there are houses everywhere, utility poles. They weren't paved, right? This is pretty much what those back roads of Hamden look like. To give you an idea of what these actually look like. Okay, let's move on. Take another map. So this is a next New Haven County map, a few years later, 1856, the H.E.C.T. Smith map. And what's significant on this one is now we see for most all the towns in the county, they show inset maps of the centers of the towns. There's been more development. And you can look around, scanning around this, different towns. Humphreysville or Seymour, Naugatuck, we have Milford, Birmingham, which is the original name of Derby. North Haven Bridge was the center of North Haven. Of course, bigger map for New Haven and the Westville section of New Haven. Bigger map for Waterbury. Go ahead. See all of Guilford. And then Sonia, Cheshire, West Cheshire, Madison, and finally way up in the corner, not Hamden, but Mount Carmel. And this is significant for being the first map that actually showed names of streets in Hamden. Although none of the street names they show here are the same names as streets have today. We see over here West Road, which is Shoreham Avenue. It wasn't a label, but this was at the time called Cheshire Turnpike, Whitney Avenue. And you can see that kind of dotted dashed line down the middle of it. The railroad tracks and canal line were really like right next to Whitney Avenue at the time. They weren't located off where the trail is now. And you can see here River Road. It's not the current River Road, but that's New Road. New Road is just a new name for the road. Mountain Street is Mount Carmel Avenue. And way over here, East Road was Hogan Road. And looking closer here too, you can see all the hub of industrial activity we had here. It's not labeled, but Ives Street here, Ives and Party Manufacturing Company called Carriage and Harness Hardware. It was quite a booming business of supplying parts to the carriage industry that was largely in New Haven. George Newhall had made carriages in Newhallville. Yeah, I think there's some other show up here too. Axle made axles. Axle shop. And what was it? One of those only detail things you can see there, springs, axle springs, so I see all the parts for the carriages. And the Hamden, New Haven are kind of the Detroit of the time. Okay, so let's so this was 1856. Now, at this time, still Hamden was still pretty much just farmers lived here, and the factory workers close to the where their factories were within walking distance. Basically, nobody commuted to from Hamden to New Haven. What year does anyone think we had our first suburban development in Hamden? That people would they had like a little blocks, streets not being far apart. They would have houses close together on lots in the block, and people would commute from their houses to Hamden. Any ideas when that first happened? What's that? 1910s? Earlier than that. That's got a lot of them. Big development.
Somebody say 1880?
Cedar Road, yeah.
1890s, getting close, yeah. Well, the very first, believe it or not, if you saw the one of the announcements for my defendant's talk, said it was 1860, specifically 1865, just a few months after the end of the Civil War. Well, before I get to that, though, I'm going to get to talking about the town line changes here. This is another map just before. If you look really closely at this, this is this kind of orange area is North Haven, the red area is Hamden. Now, currently, if you're familiar with it, the Hamden North Haven town line for a while goes down the middle of Whitney Avenue. If people were aware of that, yeah. So, when both towns were first separated from New Haven, this border that cut across from the Quinnipiac River went across Whitney Avenue to Mill River, and went up Mill River to, unfortunately, the zoom thing is just in the way here. Just to where Mill River crosses Whitney Avenue. So, in terms of what's here currently now, this spot here is Spring Glen School. It's right about there. And if you're familiar, that Spring Glen Medical Center building is right there. So everything on that side of Whitney Avenue, from Spring Glen School to Spring Glen Medical Center, was originally in North Haven.
When did they switch over, Paul?
And it was 1860, around 1860, because this Willis Churchill manufacturing company, he manufactured augers, big drill bits. And it's not too often used the name Orderville for that area, right? And you can see he had property on both sides of the Mill River, so he had to pay taxes in both Hamden and North Haven. He didn't want to bother to do that, so he petitioned the General Assembly. It might have been 1862, but whenever, and was successful to have this area transferred from North Haven to Hamden. Of course, if he knew what the property taxes were now, he would want the Hamden part to North Haven, right? Oh, by the way, too, so many digressions here. See this W. Cooper, the Cooper House. That's that old red house. That's fortunately, I heard this good news too. It's rather sad shape now, but it's fine. Someone's bought all that property on that side, and it's going to preserve that house as part of the development. So that if anyone's passed by that old red house there, that will be saved. That's some good news. Yeah. So I think now returning to what I was saying about, yes, this is the first what's called a plat, when someone wanted to subdivide land for to build houses, and the farmers sold off the land, not didn't want to farm anymore, let's make more money by selling for houses. And this is the very first plat filed in the town clerk's office. If you can see these street names here. Morris Street, hard to see. Morris was originally called St. Mary's Street, St. Mary's, Goodrich, and Edward Street. 1860. So actually September 1865 the date there. So why would, people want to live? It's if you read the text here, it says valuable 435 valuable building lots situated in Hamden, adjacent to the city of New Haven, Connecticut. Now, why would people want to live there? Well, it took me a while. I've looked at this map several times before I zoomed in enough to read this little fine writing here. 20 minutes walk from the State House. Of course, at the time, Hamden, New Haven, and Hartford were co-capitals. We had a State House on the New Haven Green. Yeah. Yeah. Another aside, and what was the Hartford Turnpike was on almost direct straight line from the New Haven State House to the Hartford State House, but inside of both. Yeah. So anyway, and it says here, so 20 minutes walk. That's gonna be a little long to walk, but it is on the line of the Centerville NH New Haven Horse Railroad. Horse Railroad.
The only thing is, Dixon Avenue, it didn't go to Centerville when it became a problem.
Yeah, it never got to Centerville. Yeah, actually, let's jump ahead to this. Here it is. New Haven and Centerville Horse Railroad, trolley car. I've seen the newsboys there, and another view, a different car, different number, but see here.
Oh, yeah.
Here's the horses. We actually had horse-drawn trolleys in Hamden. Now, it only got up through, I think, about Moore Street there, it's got that Centerville name. And this is an electric. If you look closely, you can see the pole and the wires overhead. So this illustrates a transition from the horse-drawn to electric power. It was not 1875. I should have taken that date out. It had to be in the 1890s when electric trolleys made their appearance and enabled an extension that could go much farther than the horses could. But still, even with the electric trolleys, they never up Dixon Avenue, they never got to Centerville. They only got up as far as Benham Street. Yeah.
That building in the background, the
Yeah.
tall building,
Yeah.
is the old Gamble Desmond.
Right,
Department
Gamble
store,
Desmond,
which
yes.
was torn down in the early mid-50s.
I vaguely remember it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was built in 1872.
yeah.
Is that
And-
New Haven or Hamden?
Sorry, it's New Haven Green. So this is where the horse-drawn trolley went from Southern Hamden to New Haven. So people who had jobs in downtown, maybe worked in the store,
Exactly.
people could live on St. Mary Street and take the horse-drawn trolley to work in Campbell Desmond. Yeah. Actually, let's go back, right? Just skip over here. Because this is a famous map of the first map of just Hamden in 1868. This is called the Beers Atlas of New Haven County. Each town in the county got its own large page map, and we have this framed in the history room. And what's just significant here is that you can see still we don't have a Hamden center here. We have a Mount Carmel inset map here. You can see again more of all the industrial buildings there. And the Centerville still with the British spelling there. You see there was a trotting park. You can see where the canal line was not in this location of the trail today. You can see the rectory school. I'll know a story about that. Oh yeah, the New Haven Web Company, cotton factory, it says they made cotton webbing, another building up in there, yeah. It's just right where the parkway crosses today. It was that big, it's a big web, what's called the web shop. And again, you can see a few more, lots of names on this map here.
Right, that had this former site of the trotting.
Oh, yes, that's when there was a Connecticut Savings Bank originally, and unfortunately that plaque got lost. Yeah, that plaque was taken down in one of the renovations. Yeah, and that's a shame. A lot of the historical society put that plaque up originally, and it's a shame that a lot of those plaques that the society put up have disappeared over the years. Yeah, it would be good for people to know that. Yeah, what was there. Yeah. Shame. But anyway. This was the second plat that was. Out with the town clerk for, again, more building lots. That thing there, at the junction of Dixville Avenue and New Street. What's New Street? Well, it's actually Circle Avenue. I think it was just called a new street now because it was not a road anymore, just a road to the farm. There was a street that had houses fronting it there. So that's the kind of distinction between a street and a road. That streets are more or less constantly developed. And again, you can see it's mentioned here from a half a mile from the now terminus of the NH and CH Railroad, the New Haven and Centerville Horse Railroad. That was a big selling point for these lots, was that people could easily commute from their homes to downtown New Haven. And those trolleys. Oh, this is again referring to what did these streets look like? It's year 1879. In the late 1800s, engraving companies made hundreds of these aerial views of cities, large and small, all across the country. They're really amazingly detailed. They, like I said, artists out into all the streets and take a look at every building and come up with some perspective to show all the buildings. And this is, of course, a very high resolution scan. I think this is in the New Haven Museum. You can see the original of this. And we can zoom in on this in a couple places in Hamden. This was Whitneyville, now 1879. Just a little better view. Now we have, see, different from the painting we saw before. Now there's a dam, essentially the same dam that's still damming our water supply in Lake Whitney. There it is. But you can see a lot more active factories, factory buildings there. And I think you can see zooming in here. This, when I'm pointing at here, that was the now Preservation, Connecticut. There was a single workers boarding house there. And this is probably the barn there. I wouldn't barn. And it's probably about the only building surviving today. Most of these other, a lot of this other buildings no longer exist. Probably ice houses on Lake Whitney. They saved ice for the, refrigeration. Okay, now we'll have in another view, Highwood section. I love this depiction with the train and the canal line, the steam coming out of it. And this is a good idea that it's pretty 1879 pretty built up, all these streets here. You can see some of the same names: St. Mary, Edwards, Arch Street, Bowen Street, Cherry Ann. And see quite a few houses there. Not as many as today, but it was modestly successful. People were taking it, and you can see here too. There's the horse railroad line. And if it got quite that far past Moore Street, I don't know. I guess it did. Okay, now a little digression here, but we'll tie it back in. And it's just for everyone to this thing here. Okay. So I'll show you some early 20th century postcards, different places around Hamden. And want you to not just look at the scenes, but see if you notice any little detail on all these postcards, what they have in common. Of course, this was, anybody know where this was? There used to be a suspension footbridge across Lake Whitney from the end of Putnam Avenue to the country club, New Haven Country Club. Because when it was built in, I think, 1900, still, even a lot of the rich businessmen who golfed didn't have cars. They had to take the trolley on their way home, would stop off at, or on a Saturday, would take the trolley to Putnam Avenue and then walk across the bridge to play their golf.
They tore that down in 76.
Yep, I remember. I still remember seeing. I never walked across it because by the time I was old enough to, it was blocked off. That had been stopped. A lot of teenagers would still walk across the barriers and jump off and whatever. I never did that though, Dave. I'm sure you
Blocked
did.
off, but nobody paid any attention.
Yeah, well, I did. I don't say nobody. I never work across the barriers. Okay, so let's look at the next picture there.
Oh, nice.
Oh, wait, okay. Town hall, the old town hall, the old town hall. You see the electric trolley tracks down the middle of it there.
That's the
And
same location as the new town. hall.
same location as the new town hall, right? The current town, Winnie and Dixwell, that's Dixwell, Whitney. And another view of the town hall, where you can see off on the side here, the original, or when Grace Episcopal Church moved from the Mount Carmel location, they built their meeting house there. Moved across the street in the 70s, right?
66.
66, that's right there. And okay, so let me see the town hall. Okay, another view of now the current town hall over there with the trolley tracks down the middle. And the expert antique cars might be able to know exactly what year that was.
It looks like it might be from 100 years ago because you can see it's obviously
Right.
springtime
Yeah.
and the scaffolding is still up against the town hall.
Oh, yeah, great observation. I never, I've been through this so many times, I never noticed the scaffolding. It was just, the town hall was just built in 1925. Wow, so just about exactly 100 years ago, it looks like it's still, yeah, they were still processing the scaffolding down. Wow. That's why you're here, Dave. But that's not exactly why I wanted you to notice the detail of it, but thanks, okay. Now, diagonally across from there was Centerville Drug Shop. Shirley Crooks, better know, I call it Shirley Crooks. Yeah. I was in there a couple of times, yeah, unfortunately, this didn't survive. And of course, you have to see the sleeping giant. I'll cut it away here. Winter scene, if you look carefully, you can see this is before he got scalped, before the quarry got to the head. And speaking of the quarried rock went to the Mount Carmel Trap Rock Company. And see what a bustling activity was there with the multiple sliding tracks where they would crush the stone and then ship it and put it into rail cars and ship it wherever they want, building roads all over the country or transfer it to barges in New Haven Harbor. So it's quite an industry there. Okay, so let's go look back at all these different 7 postcards. And anybody notice anything they all have in common? Yeah, black and white. Actually, the one was in color. Yeah. Double in color. They're probably not original color, they colorized them.
Maybe like the same company.
No, they're different companies. No time. Yeah, who said that?
Oh, yeah.
Who? Raise your hand.
Yeah.
Yes. None of these identify the location as Hamden.
That's right.
They identify as Whitneyville or Centerville or Mount Carmel. Is this the Mount Carmel Town Hall or the Centerville Town Hall? What I'm getting at is that at the time, Hamden, of course, it really was an incorporated town. It's like the other 150 some time. But I think it was a perception that it was just a bunch of villages in this subdivision of a county, a township. Now out west, most counties are divided into townships. They don't have government. They have little villages within them, but people didn't quite think of Hamden as a town. I think even the town government didn't sometimes, and that affected how the streets were laid out as well. See here. And just as a kind of personal connection, this is my sister's baptismal certificate. Some information out, but again, Church, LA, Mount Carmel, and city and state, Mount Carmel, Connecticut, in 1960, around 1960. People were still referring to it as Mount Carmel. And I know some people, they don't, in Mount Carmel area, anybody maybe still use that, their address, they don't want to say they live in Hamden. Mount Carmel 6518, yeah.
Mount Carmel 18.
And when before there were zip codes, everybody remember before the zip codes was Whitneyville, or Hamden's 14, 17, or 18. And it's just my theory of why when we, go again. Not too far. What, for a while, the Hamden Town Hall had this rather gaudy Hamden neon sign on it. I don't see it's, this is, it's not Center Road, it's not like, it's the Hamden Town Hall. Hamden's a real town. I think that's why they did that.
They did it for the sesquicentennial.
They first built a set, we were
Put
different,
a new one up
different,
in
yeah,
48.
yeah. It was Sesquicentennial 1836. It was, it said it was 1786 Hamden in 1936. And I think it was made with incandescent bulbs and then they replaced it with this. And yeah, okay. So returning to glass here. This is, so then once we had those electric trolleys going up State Street, they went up as far as Merritt Street. Near Ridge Road. And it's not too far from this Hubbard Place, which was probably named for our first selectman, John Hubbard. And this was on land of the selectman at the time, first up in the time, John Davis. And so we laid out this street from State Street to Ridge Road with all these, you know, 176 lots along it, each of them almost all just 20 feet wide. 20-foot wide lots fronting the street, 100 feet deep. So you can have a nice little backyard garden, but just, you know, this is what one of the original houses on Hubbard Place, this is, and built with brick, likely from, there were brick factories, very called, but they made bricks along the Quinnipiac River, so likely a lot of the houses made of brick. So you can see scale to fit just 20 feet wide. Yeah, that you could, so not on the house today on that street, there are all the houses are on wider lots than 20 feet. They combine, sort of saw they combine lots. People didn't want quite that narrow. If they had built houses every 20 feet, it would have to look like this. This is Temple Street, New Haven. We have row houses that 20 feet wide, and each one just, you know, butts up right against the other. See, that was the design, that you didn't have to have windows in the side. You could just, but nobody wanted to maybe live that close, that far away from.
Maybe that was a model house.
Yeah, yeah, maybe, yeah. And that just, you know, it's kind of a side here. That's the how houses were numbered, because 20 feet is about the smallest practical width of a house. You could number houses with consecutive odd or even numbers, and you would have a numbers increased by 1 for every 10 feet. So that's right on Temple Street here. This is 405, 407, 409, 20-foot wide house. Each number goes up by 2. That's pretty much the standard in Hamden, that the house numbers increase by 1 every 10 feet. Let's see what we're doing. Okay, move along. So this this plot here, who's this thing here? Spring Glen Manor. An interesting thing here is there's a couple of things that this illustrates how you have to be careful deciding how a street was named. The longest street witness is Thornton Street, goes all the way around here. And a few years ago, the state, I think, did a survey of historic properties, and for several houses on Thornton Street, they said Thornton Street was named for the famous playwright Thornton Wilder, who lived in Hamden. And yeah, the hall here, he did live in Hamden. They did name the Thornton Wilder Hall here for him, but you gotta look at the date on this map. 1917, April 1917. That time, Thornton Wilder was a sophomore at Oberlin College in Ohio. His first work was published in 1926. So
They saw great potential.
probably, you know, and you know, this guy in Ohio is going to come to, it's going to transfer to Yale and live in Hampton. Yeah, I don't think so. It might have been named for thorn bushes along the water company property here. That's just my guess. But I have to admit, I'm not always right myself. My first pass through of trying to decide how streets were named, I see Greenway Street here. If you're familiar with Greenway Street today, it extends to the south. South is to the left here. It extends off near Lake Whitney, and between the street and Lake Whitney, there's some evergreen trees. So I said, well, it's named for the evergreen trees next to the street. Well, you have to realize that off in the street is a different, it can be either shorter or longer originally than it is today. And Greenway Street here was nowhere near the lake. And maybe there's trees on it now, but at the time it was all cleared farmland. So there were no trees. So I just, my guess, this was named for a general, John Campbell Greenway, who was also a Yale football player. So maybe, I don't know, that's not sure, but any case, it's in the street with a natural feature name is named for a person, the street for a person name is named for a natural feature. Never be sure. What's that?
What year?
It's 1917, it's not. 1917. So on, when Gordon Wilder was just, 20 years old.
Most of those houses were built in the 20s.
Yeah, most houses were built in that. And it's a good point that this map, this plat here has 299 lots, if I counted it, not right. And I think by the end of the 20s, there were probably about 200 houses that had been built. It was quite successful. They did build a lot of houses. And there's 295 houses now. So this was much more successful than that Hubbard Place was. And I'll show you another example here of something that was, oh, nothing to notice here, way in the bottom, shows the trolley tracks on the bottom. So again, still, a lot of people didn't have cars. And keep showing that that's how you can commute to New Haven. This next plot here, Whitney Terrace. Again, you see the trolley tracks on Whitney Avenue. This is Forest Street. So this is like kind of between Centerville and Mount Carmel. And this was the largest, in terms of the number of lots, the largest subdivision in history of Hamden. 778 lots this was divided into. Again, most of them 20 feet wide. Today, there's only 119 houses. So why was this not so successful? Well, first of all, it was farther away from New Haven. You had to pay extra fare to get there. The service wasn't as frequent. And it doesn't, the plats today have to show elevation changes. If you're familiar with Forest Street, it's up a hill. You had to take a longer ride on the trolley, pay more for it, and then walk up a hill. So yeah, it wasn't, the developer probably lost some money on this. And in fact, we've lost some of the streets. Look here, we got Orchard Street and Edgewood Avenue. And I'll show you a little later map. The map in 1927. So in red here, I've shown in red all the streets that exist today. So you can look here that some of the ones that are in black, but not red. Edgewood Avenue, Orchard Avenue don't exist today. And you can see also after that Whitney Terrace went up to here, another developer came out and laid more streets. He laid out this Henley Street right next to Monroe Street, but not connected to it. He had these other, total chaos. There was no overall plan. So I'm getting into. There's no overall plan for laying out all the streets in Hamden. It just developed the way it did until we have this is the larger map, the whole map. This is the first map that showed almost all of Hamden, all the streets that exist today, with all the names on it. 1927. We have an original of this in the history room. And majority to the efforts of this gentleman here, F. Walden Wright, the first town engineer. So he tried to make sense of all the haphazard ways that the town was developing. as an engineer myself, I kind of admire him and I understand his frustration and see how the crazy way the streets were laid out. And because, as I mentioned, we were perceived as separate villages, there were duplicate street names. We had, I think for a time, there were 3 Prospect Street. And just, so, because there were separate post offices, so. But I would imagine for like tax purposes, it still got confusing in utility companies, so he went through a big process of renaming streets, mapping everything, getting, everything sorted out, so. I admire that guy, and he may have named 2 streets for himself, and Walden Street and Wright Lane. Let's see what's next here, okay. So, how did the streets get their names? Is one of the developments in another development in Spring Glen, Haverford Street, Spring Garden Street, Lansdowne Avenue, and Swarthmore Street. Yeah, it's Swarthmore. It's Swarthmore originally. Anybody have any? And you can see the trolley tracks there. Any ideas where those names came from? Pennsylvania. You didn't see me tell this before. Are you from Pennsylvania? Philly area? Very Spring Garden, so you know. Did you look up my you knew about it, okay. Yeah, well, great, thanks. This is a Philadelphia commuter rail map. It's Spring Garden, when it stops in the summer. Haverford, Ardmore's in the street across Woody Avenue, and Swarthmore. I guess in Philly they pronounce it Swarthmore. And Lansdowne, all stops in there.
How did you come by this, Paul?
How they come by this?
Yeah, this information. It's great.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how I realized that there was the Philadelphia connection there. I maybe I'm kind of interested in trains too, so maybe that's the one I saw this map and then I made the connection. That's a good point. What's that? What's that?
They're a person from Philadelphia?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that'll be a really good, if I could, if we would clinch it. See, I'm not quite about it. Did one of the developers of this Spring Glen Ridge. So we buy this Bodwell Realty Company. I have been able to find who worked for them, whether was any born there. Yeah, that would be good to really clinch it.
Well, I did research and found there was a Bodwell in Connecticut and Florida, but that's as far as I
Oh.
can get.
And I think that they developed some streets in the Quinnipiac Garden section in New Haven that have Rhode Island names. So I don't know if there was any connection there. Well, digressing too much. All right. So old cemeteries are great for finding the street names on it. This is Whitneyville Cemetery. You can see there's one stone had the Twofer, Farnsworth, and Barraclough streets in Whitneyville. And right on the corner of Mather Street, there's this big obelisk that has 2 brothers and your father, Harmon Emerson and L.U. This thing's going away. L.U. Emerson. And L.U. How do you say it? L.U. That's right. Yeah. Is that Homiston? Homiston? Homiston. That's right. L.U. Homiston. And see, they both have their first and last names on streets. There's a few other people that are like that. And it's also in that cemetery, the answer to perhaps the greatest street name mystery in Hamden. What do you think that? Why is Main Street a country lane? Well, it never was a main street and never intended to be a main street. It was named for people. Probably. These two, Veruca Main and Elias Main. They're both buried in Whitneyville Cemetery. Now, I'm not sure though, what connection of these two were. They were born 15 years apart. I haven't found their relationship, and I always found them living in Fairhaven, but they're buried in the same plot as this B. This B on top stands for George Bates, who was a stonemason. So maybe he built houses. So maybe some connection there. I don't know, but in any case, it's probably a cool name for someone named Maine. So again, pinning down, how do I find out how the street is named? This little plot here, Little Jean Street, this is just south of the DMV.
Oh, yeah.
DMV is up here. And let's keep moving this. I got six people watching me on Zoom, so I hope it's all working for them. I haven't checked in with them. What's that? No, I can hide that whole thing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Because I want you to see here. In this top here, it says property of Alice E. I guess that was McLeod. And so I looked her up in the census, found her living in New Haven in 1920. And here she is with her husband, James, and their daughter, Jean. And also checking out her husband was a contractor. So, and so just named for their daughter. And that just gives me a clue that often a lot of streets with just first names on them probably were named for relatives of the developers. Can't always pin that down, but likely assumption. Okay, so I think now we have, oh yes, one last view here. And then names kind of changing. Cross Parkway completed. It was really called just a Cross Parkway, the Wilbur Cross Parkway. And you can see here, Mayor Salentano of New Haven and the first selectman, Michael Whalen, celebrating uniting Hamden and New Haven through the tunnel there. November 1949.
Well, I wanna know if the 4 hospitalized when vehicles crashed head on was on.
City Avenue. Sulphur from
Probably.
Grace Hospital. Yeah, you have to look for one thing in the in the nuclear art, you see all these other little things that serendipitous, and that's actually help me with finding the street names sometimes. It's looking for one thing and find something else. And just kind of the current events too. I just heard that they are going to finally rehabilitate the tunnel. 70 more than 75 years old now, needs work. They're gonna at night route both directions through one tube and work on the other tube. So that'll take a while. Okay. Any questions at this point? I have a few more things to show, but
That train that used to go from Hayden to Hartford, through Hamden, is that right?
yeah, there's that train line that I showed in that map a while ago, it still exists. We had at one time, we had a station called Quinnipiac on State Street. That didn't last long at all. And it's kind of a sore spot of mine is that Hamden is the most populous municipality in the state that doesn't have rail or what's called bus express bus rapid transit. The connect the CT fast track from New Britain to Hartford that serves New Britain as that train, but there should be a train station in Hamden, yes, or at least in North Haven by Divine Street. Yeah, if we want to take the train to Hartford and Hamden, you either go back to New Haven or you go to Wallingford, and it's almost not worth it. I hear the train whistles all the time. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I don't know where they are with that. So as I mentioned, we have certain themes for street names. In some cities that they were laid out more logically. They plan on dozens of streets have all like names of flowers or Greek gods or gemstones. Or when Hamden, though, we do have this very fortunate practice of naming for men, they've all been men in town that died in wars. And we have two notable subdivisions here, Hepburn Ridge, just off Ridge Road, just north of that covered place, as both world wars in Korea, and died in all those wars. And Honor Hill, Dave's neighborhood, there's all five Vietnam,
5 of the 10. Yeah.
5 of the 10 who died in Vietnam, yeah. And there were others who died in the Revolution or in the Civil War that they were all from mostly from families that lived in Hamden many generations, centuries. So they were probably named for later members of the family when streets were named. Most of the streets were named around the turn of the 20th century. So probably not directly named for those who fought in those wars, but not still commemoration of them. So what is common in many cities is naming streets for presidents, right? So anybody want to take a guess how many streets in Hamden have the last names of presidents? But then how many were actually named for the president? Good questions.
Let's say three.
Three?
3 or 6.
3 or 6. Well, there were, just with the names, there were actually 12 streets with last names of presidents, or 13 if you count one that's only a paper street, was when it was obliterated in that map I showed you before.
Yeah.
So, and 5 of them I'm almost certain were named for the presidents. Washington, Lincoln, and Harding were all next to each other and were named right around the time after Harding died in office. And it's true that intersect Garfield and Roosevelt would have to be for Theodore Roosevelt before FDR. And there's 2 others, Monroe, I'm not sure about. Taft. William Howard Taft, after he was president, before he was Chief Justice, he taught at Yale Law School. And he was a golfer and most certainly golfed at the Living Country Club. So maybe, but Taft Street is kind of off by itself. And I'm not sure. Adams is that street doesn't really exist anymore. And all these others were named for landowners or servicemen. So definitely not named for the presidents. We do have some named for veterans who survived the war and came back and lived in Hamden. Many streets are named for people who lived there originally. I picked these Skiff, Mather, and Fredwell. You look at that 1868 map, where each of those streets today intersect this Avenue, there was someone with that name lived right there. And I forget his name, which Sherman. Sherman was the last name of an early pastor of Mount Carmel Church. Sherman Avenue comes right by the Mount Carmel Congregational. Putnam was the early pastor of Whitneyville Congregational, right? Where Putnam Avenue is. Cannon was a trustee of Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church, is right near that church. And other government officials. Albert Connolly Parkway, he was a 3rd selectman. Developers, making many developers name the street for themselves or their relatives, as I've noticed. Interesting, just couple of these names here. Jeswig. It sounds kind of not unusual name, Jeswig. In fact, it seems to be the only street in the world with that name, Jeswig. It was named for Albert Ludwig Jessen. Ludwig Jessen. He put part of his first name, part of his last name. And Lynn was maybe someone named Lynn, and it's near Wilmot Brook. I'm not sure. And acronyms was the 4 developers that with those names like Adams, Natal, Lee, and Athan, form Adla, and these were the names of George, Elizabeth, and Michael, the children of a developer. Not named for a gemstone. Yeah. What else do I have here? And the other military connections, Lexington and Concord are 2 streets. The names for the battles in the start of the Revolution. Beacon, I think it's right between them, could be for Beacon Hill. Very loose connection with Merrimack and Carrington here, are both loosely connected to the Civil War. Spanish American War is again loosely connected to that. World War I, Marne, famous battles of the Marne that commanded by Hague, Falls and Pershing, all there, and another browse of stormy hell.
Good Spanish, remember, you had Dewey.
What's that?
Street, I think.
Dewey, yeah, I didn't put Dewey in it, Dewey's in over, yeah. And we saw already those streets named for places in Philadelphia. There's a very convincing group of streets I know named for places in Maine. Sebec Street is, anybody heard of Sebec Lake in Maine? And near there is also Edgecombe and a few other little streets that are all tiny towns in Maine. And I was able to find that the developer of that subdivision did come from Maine, so maybe all places he visited in Maine. And Stowe and Stratton in Vermont because the developer likes skiing there. There's a few places near the Riverside Drive was really called Hudson, for the Hudson River, and it's near Briar Cliff and forget what else, Melrose and places. Wakefield and Woodlawn are both neighbors in the Bronx that are streets in England. And sometimes streets in another city, Dorrance, Westminster, and part of that, it's another street in that subdivision, Beechwood Heights, was really Way Bowslett. Those are 3 streets in one block in downtown Providence. Worth was probably for Worth Avenue in Palm Beach. Hartford was Hartford Turnpike, I was because Hartford Turnpike went to Hartford. Right, brother from the way to Hartford. Farmington Drive, I think for Farmington Canal, that's right here. And named for places in Hamden, Goodyear, Mountain High Rock, Wilmot Brook, general features. Friends. Types of buildings. Church Street is named for the Methodist Church. When in school, originally one of the original one-room schoolhouses was on School Street. Home had the Mount Carmel Children's Home. Still exists at the corner of Home Place and Merlin Drives, a old house there. Maybe there was a bank on, probably not a bank. Bank Street is probably named for that bank that we saw in that first picture. And this colonial revival houses on Colonial Drive and ranch houses on the Ranch Road. And I don't know about Villa, I don't know. 2 for Arthurian legends here, landslide Quinnipiac, and there's all over town, all kinds of niche names the developer for would be. But confer some sense of I jumped ahead there. Okay. All right, everybody saw those. I was gonna ask you, what's the most common street name in the United States that we don't have in Hamden? What's that? Lafayette. Where'd that come from? What's that? You have to think of, what system is commonly used in a lot of cities like Manhattan.
Oh.
Do we have a first street in Hamden?
Oh,
Anybody know?
yes, we do.
We have a second street?
Yes, we do.
We have a third street?
Yeah.
We have a fourth street? We have a fifth street?
No.
Yeah, Fifth Street. Okay, what's the most common that's not a number? That's okay. Ooh, I'll see that. So we have second, third, first, fourth. We have fifth. Main. Oak is the most common that's not a number that we don't have in Hamden. And what's the most common street name in Connecticut that we don't have in Hamden? No numbered streets common in Connecticut. And that's a tough one. So I'll just say it's West Street. Never West. Yeah, well,
Interesting.
but whatever. And we have some streets that apparently exist nowhere, quite a few exist nowhere else in the world. As I mentioned, that Linmont, some of the names for the servicemen too are very unique. I don't know if I have any, that's it. So just going back to this picture, I gotta thank Dave for suggesting that I juxtapose this picture was probably like 1930s.
Actually, 48.
48, well, thanks for that, yeah, a little later, yeah, I was because maybe did they take the trolley tracks out of it? Yeah, maybe, yeah, so, yeah. So we can go back and forth from that view to more or less today. Good place.
Oh, yeah,
So you see a lot of the same, the bank's pretty much the same.
yeah,
That building is different.
yeah.
Some of the rows of houses there still, bigger trees. Bigger trees, but you can still see some of the same houses in the same place.
Yeah.
That I mentioned again, that French Italian liquor store
Where'd you get that?
still there. The new beer, this is Google Earth is a great thing. And you can zoom in and I think at different elevations and twist, turn any orientation you want. So that's really great.
Great.
Okay, so that's about it. Just want to show you here. That's my email address if anyone wants to note that down. If you have any ideas about the street you live on, or I've been guided for like David Zerlini or someone 6-7 years. Yes,
Curious about Paradise Ave, like,
Paradise. Yeah. Oh, that was named for A.C. Gilbert's house. You know A.C. Gilbert, the rector set and all. And he lived in a house there called Paradise. Someone lived there before when we named it Paradise, just for its location. I guess he thought it was Paradise. And there's still the Paradise Country club there. It was originally for his employees. Yeah. Oh, and so if you go to the Hamden Historical Society website or search for Hamden Historical Street Names, if you search for that, you should pretty easily find the page I have with what I know about all the street names. I'm going to try to, in my copious free time soon, I'll update the Hamden Historical Society main page. You can easily find it in the main page. And it's very much a cooperative effort. I'm still learning about street names. If you have any ideas, please let me know what you any stories you have is really welcome. Oh, another point I should mention in terms of pictures here, that in the history room we periodically get inquiries. Do you have a picture of such and such a street corner in the 1940s or something? We don't have that many, but I'll bet in a lot of our attics or stashes of photos somewhere. There you do have pictures, maybe picture of a family in the background of some scene in Hamden. And I know it takes a while to find it. I'm going through my process myself, trying to sort through all my old pictures. If you come across any old scenes of Hamden, if you're willing to donate them to the Historical Society, or at least let us take a scan of them, then we'd really love to have those. So let's keep that in mind too.
Get that email address.
What's that email address? Oh, the HHS or HHS at
HHS@hamdenlibrary.org.
HHS@hamdenlibrary.org. Yeah,
It's the history room.
history room. Yeah,
Or
or
just
just
the originals to you, as well as a disc with the scanned image as well, for the bonus.
Yeah. Anything else?
Right.
Yes.
Don't forget, any
Okay.
questions?
Right. Yeah, yes, okay. But yeah, we'll discuss it too, right? Any?
There was somebody who had their hand.
Yes, yeah, I can take a question too, right? A street, Davis, yes, I did for two possibilities, so I think, yeah.
Well, wasn't that Davis Brick?
Yeah, Davis
Brick.
yeah. And there was also, let me add the Zoom meeting.
I have a question. I'm
Oh,
Donna
so-
Doverhall Smith.
Yeah,
I'm wondering, when were when do you know when traffic lights were added?
traffic lights, that's a good question. I don't know. Well, look at this picture here, you said 1948. Yeah, there is a traffic light, I think, well, starting by 1948, we had a traffic light.
And when they paved the main roads like Dixwell
Yeah,
and
the main roads are probably very early 1900s, 1910. Yeah.
But they were all Indian trails before, right?
So there are.
Correct? They were all Indian trails?
Yeah, they were originally. So I got noise in here.
They were Indian trails before?
Yes, some of them were, a few, like State Street, or like Ridge Road, State Street, probably, Quinnipiac Avenue, maybe, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming in.